Okay, so it's 2 minutes after the hour here, so we'll get started here. Thank you all for joining our webinar series. Today, we're going to be talking about operationalizing agentic AI in claims. Before we get started with the panelists and dive into this topic, let me give you a quick overview of our organization and some of our upcoming events, and then we'll dive into it. And so for those of you who don't know, InsurTech New York is a community-based organization. We try to connect those in the insurance ecosystem, carriers, brokers, to InsurTechs and investors. And we do this through many different programs we have. We have startup programs that I'll be talking about a little bit. We also have many different events that we host, and we also do a lot of research as well. And we also make investments in early stage companies. So I just want to highlight a few different items that are coming up over the next couple of months. We have two different startup programs where the applications are open. We have a program called MGA Lab where we help create new MGA businesses. And then we also have an InsurTech Match program where we try to connect InsurTechs typically kind of in the growth stage, Series A to B stage area, and we connect them to carriers and brokers. So the application for it is open right now. So please apply. The deadline, it will be in 2 weeks. So if you're interested in both, you can actually go to the website, InsurTechNY.com. And there are also information session video that we just completed this week, or actually last week. And you can listen to some of the information related to the programs and questions and answers. So hopefully you can watch that video and also apply. And our next webinar series is going to be happening next month. We'll be co-hosting this with Samsung. And, we delve into claims and underwriting a lot of different insurance value chains, but everyone is also still interested in how overall general employees can benefit from AI and productivity. So we'll be talking about that next month, July 23rd. So hopefully you can all register. And then finally, we have our annual conference. Date is set. Topic is set. It's going to be at the same place, Chelsea Piers. And the topic is insurance at a crossroads, and it'll be April 5th to 6th. The tickets are on sale. It's probably at the lowest discount or highest discount, lowest price that you can get right now. So hopefully you can go and register right now. All right. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome our panelists here. We'll be talking about operationalizing agentic AI claims without the audit risk. I'll be your moderator today. And I'm just a quick intro. I'm one of co-founders of InsurTech New York, which we just talked about. And then I'll ask the panelists here to just share a little bit about themselves before we dive into the topic. So maybe we can go from left to right. June, Chris, and Frederick. You want to start up, June?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Jun Yamada here from Token Marine Global Services, VP of Business Transformation within this organization, which just launched this year, 1/1 of 2026. We're just an extension of Token Marine Holdings, which is the management company of all the subsidiaries across the globe for Token Marine. I started my career actually in claims. I was a bilingual claims adjuster for the Token Marine, kind of the expat community that we served for the businesses, the Japanese businesses working in the US. So handled personal lines, auto, personal lines, homeowners claims for about 6 years until I decided I had enough of the stress and moved on to business process improvement within an organization, then left Token Marine for a few years doing consulting work on insurance transformation, specifically implementing Guidewire Claim Center across various carriers in the US. And then I ended up back at Token Marine Holdings now as part of the business transformation team. So my background has been primarily claims, although, we've been looking at different value chains in the insurance ecosystem, but, I tend to, focus on your areas of expertise naturally. So here I am today and looking forward to engaging with you all.
Thanks, June. And Chris?
So Christoph, CEO of Adlib Software. I've spent nearly 2 decades in and around this problem. So think of it as like intelligent document processing and automation specific to insurance. all the way from co-leading Deloitte's intelligent automation practice to running strategy and AI at Kofax, now Tungsten Automation, to leading Base64.ai. Tony, that's where you and I first met. What pulled me to Adlib is pretty simple. I think everyone in claims is racing to go agentic, but agents are only as trustworthy as the data that you feed them. It's very pragmatic, but it's something that's often overlooked. So for 20 plus years, Adlib has turned the messiest regulated documents into AI-ready data that will hold up to auditor exams. And over the last year, we've invested heavily in our agentic capabilities, and excited to announce that maybe within the next week, an investment around an acquisition in this exact space. So stay tuned.
Thanks, Chris.
Hi, everyone.
Frederick?
Yes, my name is Frederick. I am the CEO and founder of Paperbox, a Belgium-based, so European-based InsurTech. And we provide agentic claims, policy admin, and underwriting, and specifically intake of emails, documents throughout claim settlement, policy administration tasks, and underwriting completion. We do this for over 75 insurance carriers and brokers, so we have a lot of experience in the space. And personally, myself, I've been working in applying AI for over 10 years now. So initially in different industries, working as an AI and data engineer, so very hands-on, to now the last 5 years really focusing on insurance. So we've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly, and I'm very happy to be here.
Amazing. Yeah, we have a perfect kind of experience of speakers here. So really looking forward to the discussion. So today we're gonna kind of jump into like 3 different topics. First is understanding like the data intake, like what to do there. And then once you get the data, how do you make sure the AI is explainable and there's like an audit trail. And the final piece is how can we scale whatever we are able to kind of pilot it and implement initially. And for those in the audience, there should be a button for Q&A or questions. If you have any questions, feel free to type them in, and I will try to see if we can answer some of those questions for you during the panel discussions or potentially at the end. So yeah, so without further ado, let's get started. So trust problem at the intake is the first kind of like theme here. And first, June, I want to kind of go with you first. What were the first steps you took to bridge any technical gap you might have had in terms of what you wanted from agentic claims handling? And, you might have had some team that probably didn't have the capability to start because agentic AI is so new. So just in some of your experience implementing some of these claims handling process, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, to be frank, we haven't implemented anything yet.
Okay.
We're still a lot of the group companies, and that's what we call them at Token Marine, the group companies, which are basically the subsidiaries under holdings. But they're still very cautious with agentic and AI in general. So really, it's not technical. The biggest challenge is change management. But obviously, with our group companies, they're all fairly, have their legacy processes and legacy systems in place. So, a lot of times some of these vendors would look at the end state vision of, claims end-to-end capabilities of how to implement agentic, but that's not really the right approach for us. It's more of decomposing, the claims lifecycle from F&OL, ingestion, extraction, validation, triage, etc., and see which parts are information processing problems versus actual judgment, because that's where really the kicker is, right? Is who's actually handling the claim, right? Even for like auditing purposes. So, that led us to just kind of the foundational capabilities that you see that most of you are probably familiar with, either are tinkering with or have actually productionized, like document ingestion, extraction, summarization, validation, letter generation, etc. So those are being slowly implemented across our ecosystem of sister companies. And then obviously, that's where claim summarization is probably less invasive than the agentic world that we're seeing. So we're just kind of building that trust, right? They tend to be very cautious, and rightfully so, right? It's a highly regulated industry. And so, a lot of, especially when we get into like litigation and stuff, it's like who's actually making the decision. The courts have not set too much precedent yet on how carriers are able to use AI, on sensitive claims. So that's kind of where we are. Hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah, so you're kind of building not necessarily agentic kind of capability, but foundation underneath them, but AI capability, and then hopefully you can get to the agentic side pretty soon.
Exactly. And
Yeah,
there's fear
yeah.
that we're just gonna other carriers are probably might be moving faster, more quickly in that world, but we are where we are, and I think ultimately we just need to. A lot of times what they ask me is what are other carriers doing, right? Like they want to see another carrier actually using agentic in real life and actually seeing what's the ROI, right? Like, is it just they're doing it for the sake of doing it, or is it actually some benefit? Obviously there is, right? But they want to be able to quantify that and see if they're losing ground, which they have, according to the folks I speak with, that hasn't been the case yet. So
yeah, and maybe you can kind of jump into that at some point. Case studies that maybe Chris, Fred, you've seen. But so kind of moving on to the next question here, Chris. So you kind of mentioned that at Adlib, this is kind of what you guys do. But what is a test a carrier could run to find out if their data foundation is actually they're ready to do AI? It doesn't have to be specifically agentic AI, but just AI work in the claims, right? So you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and before I jump on that one, just to sort of put a bow on, June, what you were talking about, we see this and sense it like across the industry. So you're not alone on this one. And like from
that's
a
good
first
to know. Thank you.
yeah, from a first principles perspective, I ask myself why. Like why? I ask myself why like 50 times a day. But I ask myself why, and what it comes down to, I believe anyway, is that we have spent years investing in people, process, and technology to get to a level of comfort that we are confident that we've got a deterministic, set of processes that result in what it is we need. Um, and when you introduce new innovation into it, regardless of how much power and potential that innovation has, it feels like you're moving from deterministic back to probabilistic. And as you know, in our regulated industries, probabilistic isn't good enough. And so it's how do we take this really powerful agentic and AI technology and put in place effective guardrails to make it as deterministic as possible. And then the litmus test becomes like, will it pass, compliance? Will it pass like auditor sniff test? And so that's where a lot of our customers are today. And that's what we help them with is like putting in those guardrails to make their investment in AI safe enough for them to begin to move it from, experiment into production. So you're not alone. All right.
Oh, yeah.
Tony, your question was around like the test that a carrier should run.
Yeah, you kind of mentioned some of them, but if you want to delve into more of it, that'd be great.
Well, I think like the mistake that most carriers make is testing their AI on best case scenario documents because they want a great outcome. And so they can almost like rig the game, if you will, around providing only the best documents. But as we all know, you really need to run it on your worst documents because those are likely to be the most challenging portion of your business. And again, if it runs great on 95%, but the 5%, the challenging documents is where it falls off the rails, then everything gets shut down. So you really have to account for that 5% to make sure the 95% can actually go into scale. So what I would do is I'd pull like a representative sample of real intake, which includes, to June's point, like handwritten FNOLs, mislabeled PDFs, these massive like 40-page packets with multiple file types that all need to be stuffed into one file. and then run it through a series of tests. One, straight through yield on that worst, portion, whether it's 5% or 20%, but run straight through yield on that. And then you're going to be like really surprised with the result, because it's probably going to be pretty poor. Two is that you have to calibrate like the confidence level. When the system says 90% straight through processing, does that mean that's right 90% of the time? Those are not the same. And the third one is I would pick one random claim and reconstruct it end to end. Input every, transformation, the decision, the output. And if you can't do that in minutes, you're not production ready. And so those are a few things that I would do to ensure that you're setting a solid like data foundation for you to then begin, because I think that's the gap between a great demo and a true deployment.
Yeah, that's seems like there's testing on the best case scenario seems like disaster waiting to happen there, because it's not realistic, right? So yeah, with a lot of these claims processing, it seems like it can be all automated, but in real life, Frederick, based on your experience, how much of the claims intake process is actually like automated, or like or how much of it requires human touch? Any kind of thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think first of all, I want to state that often talking about the topic of straight through processing, there's this idealistic desire to automate everything with zero human touch, and I don't think it necessarily holds true, because none of our customers have actually asked us like, how can we automate all of the intake without ever touching it. It's not the thing they're optimizing for. It's what Jun mentioned earlier. Are we automating for the sake of automation, for the sake of doing something with agentic AI, or what is the purpose? What are we trying to achieve here? And very often it falls into the category of operational efficiency, but also the quality of customer service. And the reality is that a lot of brokers and insurers are spending a lot of time on admin and too little time on creating added value. So when we talk about automating claims intake or automating claims end to end in general, it's realistically less than 50% can be fully automated. It's the low value claims. It's the easy ones where we don't want to spend too much time. It's like when you're shopping on e-commerce and you're sending something back, you get an automatic repayment, right? Because nobody wants to spend time on analyzing whether you should get back your money, yes or no. But if you're as a customer, like as a policy holder, the question is, do you want your claim to be handled automatically, or would you want a person to look at it? And the answer is it depends, right? So when talking about straight through processing in claims, there's a few, like setting aside that context, there's a few things that hold back true automation. And Chris has covered on a few of them. But one is that with a lot of claims, there's multi-document ambiguity. A claim arrives in 5 attachments, a description, sometimes over different emails, sometimes there's a follow-up, and the whole claim intake requires a contextual understanding of everything that is happening. While you can still achieve this with a model, it becomes increasingly difficult as there's more ambiguity. Second thing we touched is handwriting, low quality scan, stuff like that. I'm not going to go into more detail there. And then the third one that we're facing a lot is ambiguity in business processes. If we're comparing different claims adjusters or different claims handlers, and we find that reality often shows that they each have a different process to work those claims. They use a different typology. Maybe they label it differently because there's no clear standardization in terms of business process there. Then automating is going to be very difficult. So starting our work with our customers is really about data quality on one hand, but then also business process standardization and the governance around it, which really leans into auditability, into compliance. So having more technology driving automation is not necessarily bad news for compliance. but it means you really need to tailor this controlled environment.
Yeah, no, I think you guys covered that. Data is clean data is probably most important part, and then having the right process in place. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to automate everything, although that sort of seems to be kind of the ultimate goal here. But for those in the claims department, don't look for another job yet. You still have a role in this ecosystem, and probably so for foreseeable future, because there's still a lot of processes that need more handholding and oversight. And so now let's get into the next topic here. Frederick, you mentioned the audit trail, explainability. We are in the regulated industry, and so it's something we need to be always mindful of. So, June, as you're thinking about implementing agentic AI or just AI in the claims processing side, what areas are you like working on or that you're most concerned about in terms of potential regulator inquiry? So you did mention that it's not clear to you right now. It's not clear, right? That they come up with some different policies, but no one's actually I think strictly enforcing it, but they will eventually, right? So how do you think about that, Joe? What are the areas you're most concerned about when it comes to audit trail and explainability?
Yeah, Tony, before I jump into that, there's some questions. Should we answer those later or just after the call or after?
Yeah, I'm reading some of them as
Okay.
they come, and then we'll try to
Okay.
answer them at the end, I think.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah, obviously this is one of the key components of why we have kind of this cautious approach around the explainability and audit trail. So it's really not like the model itself we're really concerned about. Obviously, there's tons of models out there that are right now that are sophisticated and becoming more and more sophisticated literally day by day, right? So it's about how the output shows up in the claim file and how those decisions can be reconstructed later, right? The regulators, plaintiff attorneys, they're not going to accept, something that the model just said yes or no, right? They're going to ask what data was used, what did the tool produce, who reviewed it, or what actually drove the final decision, right? For instance, so obviously the first key component is human in the loop, right? Which is, I think everyone can agree that that's a given, right? That as I think Frederick mentioned, no one's looking for full on strictly processing, right? There's always got to be human in the loop for many different reasons, but so the AI output should never be kind of like the sole decision making tool, right? The adjuster still needs to remain accountable. And then the second piece is like the purpose clarity, right? Like there's a big difference between a tool that organizes documents versus one that influences valuation or settlement. So just be very explicit about that boundary. And then auditability, obviously, right? We need clear record of inputs, outputs, human review, and final actions. And then the fourth, explainability, right? At the business level, not how the model works technically, right? As I mentioned, but how those decisions can be explained in plain terms, right? Because if you talk about like the nuances of the model, the technical terms, like no one's really going to understand that, right? It's really about how those terms are explained through facts, evidence, and rationale. And then, the fifth one is really defensibility, right? Because especially in claims, when they become litigated, right, AI output can create discoverability. So that's really probably the key component of why our carriers, or at least under Tokyo Marine, have taken a cautious approach specifically around AI and litigation, right? Because when courts, uncover a claim and they start using their discoverability of like how those outputs are being used, right? And why. And if you don't have any accountability or kind of explainability of what that is, then, they're not even sure how to respond to that, to be frank. And so, that governance has to be designed up front, right? I think that's really what we're still trying to fine tune. And if anything, as a global service, entity, now that we just started this year, some of the group companies have been coming to me and say like, what are some of the guidelines, governance guidelines that we can help design so that we feel a little bit more comfortable using AI in our adjudication process, right? Because that hasn't been set yet, right? So
Yeah. So you guys are still kind of coming up with the governance structure.
yeah,
It's just like a work in progress. Yeah.
right. So we have an
Yeah.
AI governance model, right?
Yeah.
But that's pretty high level. When
Yeah.
it comes to like claims, well, especially litigation, because like claims, I mean, some of the you know, agnostic solutions like summarization, right? That's not really claims, right? You can summarize like underwriting, you can claims, anything, right, for that matter. So those types of tools have already either been productionized or they're working to productionize across our ecosystem of companies. But litigation really is where it hits the wall, right? Because then they're just like, all right, let's just back up a little bit and see how this evolves a bit more before we start leveraging AI litigation. But the problem here, though, is that if you guys, for some of you who are familiar with the industry, is the carriers are just getting hit hard on litigation, right? You know, outside of social inflation and nuclear verdicts, the plaintiff attorneys are leveraging AI like you wouldn't believe it, right? I mean, there's a statistic saying that 100% of demand packages are now created by AI, right? So, and there's third-party litigation funding. There's VCs that are investing in AI for plaintiffs. You know, the regulation, the regulatory field is unfortunately more governing the insurance carriers and defense as opposed to the plaintiff, right? The plaintiffs are a little bit more free in what they do with AI. And so there's a exponential gap that's growing between the plaintiff side, defense carrier side, and it's continuing to grow. And maybe if you look at the graph chart of like the expense cost of defense spend and the indemnity on litigation, that is probably going in parallel to how AI is being leveraged on the plaintiff side. So that I don't know if that's a correlation or that's a
Yeah.
cause and effect, but
Yeah.
you know, so that has to be, and that's what I'm trying to educate our carriers, right? Our Tokyo Marine is like, hey, you guys are telling me that litigation management is a pain point, but yet you're afraid to do really push the needle on AI. Meanwhile, the plaintiffs are every demand packet you're getting is just driven by AI analytics to find the best case that they feel like they can get the biggest bang for their buck. Meanwhile, VCs are investing in them. There's third-party litigation funding. Private equity firms are investing in them. So, so it's crazy right now. So,
Yeah. Yeah. It's we don't invest in those companies, but there's certain VCs who do, which
right.
I can't speak for them, but yeah, that's a tough situation to be in. So I mean, what are some things that you've seen among the carriers and others that you work with, other corporations, where they can make these problems worse by taking shortcuts in their governance process? You have some examples that you can share.
You mean outside of Tokyo Marine?
No, Chris. I'm asking Chris.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
one, June, like I love I think you said like facts, evidence, and explainability in terms of like what's really needed at the end of the day, and that we probably shouldn't be measuring like straight through processing as Frederick. You can measure it, but if that is like the goal, then I think you are sort of like misplacing, the focus of the business, because you're absolutely opening yourself up at the end of it's not just the process, but 12, 18 months later to litigation. I think you expose yourself there. But and I think that marries up with the shortcut that we do typically see, which is that most teams are logging the decision, but not the evidence. They capture if they are using automation, or if they are in like pre-production using agents, like they capture the agent approved the claim at say 92% confidence, and then they stop there. What they don't capture is are they able to reproduce the underlying chain of custody that led them to that level of confidence, and obviously and inevitably they were able to adjudicate a claim. And I think, which version of the model and the prompt that it ran on, but the raw inputs, every transformation that the data went through, why the confidence landed where it did, like all of that needs to be captured and documented. And it's not in most instances, because again, in the moment, it's simply not needed. And so it passes every internal dashboard. It looks great. The demos, show up beautifully, but it fails the first real audit. And I think that's where, the plaintiff's attorney, as June said, like, they don't want to know that the agent decided something. They want to know how. They want to know, and like maybe like the most important piece of it is that they want to be able to see you reproduce it. And that's where I get back to, it needs to be deterministic in terms of the process that's used to get to that final output or that adjudicated decision. Simply saying like the model said so and here's the score, that's not a defense. And if you can't regenerate the decision from the same inputs and show that lineage, you don't have an audit trail. You basically just have like a receipt at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And we all know like that's not enough to carry, especially when you've got a plaintiff's attorney coming at you.
Yep. That's a good
Yeah.
point, right? Of like, because you can run it through your model, you may get a different answer every time, right?
Exactly.
So, anyways, yeah, thank you.
All right. So we're gonna move on to kind of the last topic here. Is like scaling without losing control. So Frederick, just wanted to ask you, as with the companies you've been working with, as they start from pilot mode and then as they try to scale up, what are some things that you've seen basically, you can see from the pilot phase that, will become a problem once they start implementing? What are some early signs you've seen?
Can you elaborate a bit? Some early signs of what exactly?
Or
When they're
early
scaling up?
signs of failure as you're scaling. So
Failure,
you
yes.
start doing the pilot and that, hey, we think that this is not going to scale. Like, what are some early signs?
Yeah, so there's this interesting thing, and I think June has also hinted it in the beginning. If you ask insurance carriers who's working with AI, most of them will raise their hands, and if you ask them how many of them has put AI in production into a real life working environment, you're gonna lose a lot of hands. So it's that demonstrates how difficult it is to go from a pilot or a controlled environment to a real flowing business process where a lot of things can happen. What we see in practice with, for example, claim submissions, policy submissions, underwriting requests, and so on, is that there's so many edge cases. Like if you throw any email into ChatGPT or into Claude, you'll get probably a very accurate assessment of what is in the email, what needs to happen, and so on. But if you do this at company scale for different business departments, for different business lines, and across hundreds, thousands of edge cases, then suddenly you lose the level of control that you want to have over what decisions are being made and why. So when in a pilot environment, it's pretty easy. You have an edge case, you find a clever solution, and then it sort of still holds up. You're trying to prove the technology, so you've proven it, it's working in X amount of the cases, and in these cases we do X, Y, Z. But if you're scaling without taking into account the complexity of those business environments and those edge cases, the edge cases will create exponential problems because each edge case is going to lead to a series of actions that need to be taken. So while you might be saving a lot of work in theory, in reality, you're creating a lot of additional work. So that's one thing we see that breaks when scaling from pilot to production. Another thing that breaks is human perception or the emotional side of it. Sometimes you're doing a pilot with a team that is trained to run a good pilot, and they believe in the technology, they know what they're doing, they trust the process, they trust the purpose, sorry. Then you deploy, so it works in theory, it's validated, it works, all the edge cases are being taken care of, and we know this is going to scale in a robust way. But suddenly the people at the ground, the claims handlers, the account managers, they're resisting the system, and they're finding the most incredible clever workarounds as to not use the system as it's intended to be used, which yeah, everybody can imagine, because we all know examples in the real life or in the real world how this is happening. So there's this very human side of adopting AI, adopting agentic processes, where it cannot be understated how data savviness and maturity around data and AI in general is such an important part of the foundation before deploying anything.
Yeah, no, the human side is definitely one of the things that's often neglected. We know, just working with a lot of carriers, if the necessary stakeholders who will end up using the technology is not involved with the pilot, it will fail like 90% of the time. So they have to be involved. We'll kind of get to the last question. This is for both all three of you, whoever wants to kind of answer them. We talked about getting into litigation, and we don't want to get there, right? So to kind of prevent us from getting to that point or get to the litigation and be able to win, what is like one thing that carriers should be doing starting today so that they don't get into that situation? Any of you can kind of share your thoughts. Assuming we're going to implement like agentic AI claims, like what is one thing we can do starting today?
Yeah. So the one thing that we see
Yeah.
repeated, not just in insurance, but in other regulated industries as well. So this is almost like a common denominator. But what I would say is that for insurance specific, I would say the carriers who survive that subpoena that June was talking about earlier, they will have built the audit trail before they built the agent that's performing the work, which means not retrofitting explainability after an incident. And I think like that's the single most important thing to get right first before any of the exciting agentic capability is that continuous field level like chain of evidence for every claim that you're going to like run through that process. So every claim, every input, again, transformation of the data, how that data is handled, the confidence and how you're scoring that, all the way up into the final decision as the output. So I think if you get that right, then you have what the auditors would call like compliance grade AI. And that all, of course, has to be built on a foundation of, compliance grade data.
Audit trail.
And
Great.
to add to that, the audit trail is more than a log, right? It's not just a data log that you dump as a proof point. It needs to be queryable. It needs to be workable. It needs to be managed really well so that you can respond to difficult questions when it matters and show the confidence that you actually know what has happened, rather than a theoretic claim saying that somewhere in the system you can sort of refactor what has happened if you really want to. So it's really the auditability and explainability of what has happened by design before even starting to automate. A second one that I want to emphasize, it builds on my point that I made before, is that the carriers who survive will have kept humans meaningfully in the loop on the decisions that carry the risk, not as a rubber stamp, but really as a genuine review. If the question in litigation is, did the AI make this decision, and you can respond confidently that for this decision, it was reviewed. This instance was reviewed by a person who agreed to the decision. It's going to be a completely different discussion altogether. So it's really, I'm gonna loop back to where I started, but it's really not the point of can we automate everything, but what is the work that we want to route to humans, and what is the work that we want to automate to the level where we feel confident that we are doing the right thing.
Great.
Yeah, both Chris and Frederick took the words out of my mouth, and maybe even better than I would explain it. But if I were, we should probably take their words and build our governance model around kind of what they said. But I can agree with both of those points.
Audit trail, make it explainable, and then keep human in the loop. Great. And so now we have a few extra minutes here, and thank you all for those in attendance for asking questions. So we're going to try to cover them as much as we can over the next few minutes. So we'll just kind of go from top to bottom here. Srinivasa asks, what are the main areas and claims most likely will from initial trials, which areas will get the most resistance? I think that's kind of what you're asking. You guys want to take this, any of you?
I can take a stab at it.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
just
yeah.
from what I understand, obviously, this kind of goes back to our discussion earlier about, just kind of the table stakes tools that we've seen, right? Summarization, right? Like claims are just a voluminous amounts of documents are tied to claims files, right? To the hundreds to thousands of pages. And so ingesting and summarizing those documents for the adjuster or some other adjuster that may take over your claim file, right? Or when you get a demand packet from an attorney that's 500 pages and you're trying to get a response to it by the next 24 hours, going through 500 pages. Meanwhile, you have probably 150 pending file count in your domain. So, using tools like that is just becoming more and more table stakes. It's very common, right? But when it comes to like litigation and very sensitive issues, that's where the resistance is, as we talked about throughout this discussion. So even at FNOL, right? I think there's not too much resistance there, but I think this ties into another question about someone saying a carrier had challenged the last carrier that Jesse was at had a cat response, and they hired some temp folks who didn't have a job the prior day, but all of a sudden they're doing F&O intake, right? I think that's where like Agentic or AI can cover, right? Because they can, if anything, I've seen Agentic where at the F&O where they will come back to you and say, well, you're missing some information. Like I can't process your claim unless you give me X, Y, and Z, rather than just take it as is and just dump it in where a lot of the information could be incorrect, right? And when they are inputting that data, they are inputting it correctly. And so I've spoken to a few vendors just over literally the past few weeks about this for F&O or for CAT claims, right? Because that is a pain point that every carrier does have, especially if you're doing, property losses, right? So there's, again, different areas in the claims value chain that, like subrogation, for instance, right? Like that's an area some of our group companies have implemented kind of AI, right? Like they're looking for the loss run history to see where there's potential missed opportunities to subrogate on a claim file. For instance, we have one where there's a high net worth carrier that we have in our group companies. And for property losses, a lot of times if there's a fire loss, it's high net worth, they don't insure anything under $3 million. So every house is 3 million or above. And so they're very, very critical on how they adjudicate property losses because there's a lot at stake. And so they use a tool now where it's looking at your claim file and, at a fire report, right? Or a medical, a police report, or whatever it may be, where a fire loss has happened. And through that, you're not going to really understand like where there might have been a recall, right, on a barbecue pit that you have just purchased from Lowe's, right, or some other warehouse, right, where in fact there was a recall number that was, no one's looking at TV all day, right, and adjusters are not going to look for a recall number for every component or part, piece of equipment that you have in the house. But what AI can do now is look at all the different types of furniture, like equipment or OEMs that you have in your house, and run an analysis and tell you, hey, your barbecue pit that you purchased last week has a recall number saying this might start a fire. You need to return it, right? Like that's when you can start subrogating against the OEM, where adjusters will just have no way that they can definitively find that without putting so much manpower into that, right? Because we're looking through a product line of all the things in your house and looking for a recall number for each one is just not feasible, right? So there's different areas where it's really been pretty common across our group companies and using these AI tools, and then some others a little bit more cautious, right? So
yeah, thanks for that. So we might be able to, you guys have a few more minutes. I know we're supposed to end our webinar at 45th minute, but you guys can stick around, maybe can get some couple more questions answered here.
Yeah.
So the next question here is, what are kind of lines of business that are best fit for implementing agentic claims, between property and casualty, life, health, personal line, commercial lines? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I've got just a general statement, and Frederick obviously is closer to like the ground floor on this one. But this also marries up with a couple of the other questions that I see in there. So typically automation and AI is best applied where you've already optimized the business process. And what I saw in a few of the questions was, well, we're missing some of the, the evidentiary data, the early data around, the look feel of an asset that's not being collected. How do we fix that? Well, your AI and automation isn't going to fix that. Like that's where, June said he went into like business process management to like get out of like a stress-free or a stressful job. I don't know like how that makes sense because it's really stressful because you're going into the broken and the unknown. But don't start with the broken and the unknown. Like you truly need to like figure out what the optimal process needs to look like where machines play, where humans play, and then what the inevitable outcomes need to be and what the handoff is before you put AI or automation on it. Otherwise, you're just going to like accelerate an existing like broken process.
Yeah, if we're talking different business lines, I mean, in practice, we see AI applied across every business line. And it might be applied differently. If we're talking personal lines insurance, personal lines claims are going to be more standardized, are going to be more automated. And you want it that way, because if you lose a small item, for example, you just want the claim to be settled quickly, or you have like an airline claim or whatever, you want it to be as standardized and as automated as possible. If we're talking commercial lines claims, often these claims are very more data heavy or more complicated, and we want to use agentic AI to structure and streamline data ingestion so that the claims handler has the context to make an accurate decision as fast as they can, so that they can address as many claims as accurately as they can within a certain time frame. So we would still use agentic AI there for the intake, but not necessarily for the claims decision. Just to give one example of how it differs between business lines. Applying this, you can. I mean, obviously I'm betting big on AI being applied across business processes, but this is the reality we're in today, and it's really a matter of figuring out not necessarily how can you apply as much AI as possible, but really like how can this tool, how can these sets of tools help me to achieve my goal, which is settling the claim, helping the customer, reassuring the customer, and very often it starts with how you treat the data, where obviously AI, like the example of June, was a clear example of how you process a lot of data from a lot of different sources in very quickly to then make a human judgment call.
Yeah, great. There's a few architectural questions. So maybe if you can help answer that, that'll be great. So Robert Zoko asks, what architecture governance measures should insurers take to avoid operational disruption when local AI applications depend on third-party APIs that may later be restricted by jurisdiction, expert controls, or vendor policy changes? Any thoughts on this?
Well, one of the things that I see Frederick's getting ready, but I think, Tony, you're going to socialize like our contact information with everybody. This is a very deep conversation. I'm happy to bring like our chief product and our chief architect into that conversation to help this particular individual, because that sounds like there's a lot on the line with that. So I'd hate to give a 15-second soundbite.
Okay.
I was gonna add just briefly that when I work with CIOs, 5 years ago, I would advise them for any big investment into AI or into modern technology, cloud technology, you name it, you need an exit strategy on a 5-year horizon, because The technology gets outdated, and you need to be able to replace it with minimal business disruption. Even if you decide to keep it, you want this to be in place. This timeline is shortening. It's not 5 years anymore. It's, I don't know, is it 3 years? Is it 2 years? When we're talking about third-party APIs, for us, for example, for our backend, we're very used to swapping different suppliers depending on the accuracy of the models, the cost of the models, or anything that might happen beyond our control. So it's really just a different way of building and programming technology, where we move away from a world that is based on monolithic software architectures, and you move to a place where you can plug and play and design as such, which comes with different complexity, which I totally fully understand. But that's part of the world we're in right now, and how you should look at those investments, really.
Yeah, and another thing with this one, just from an overarching, design principle perspective, and I've talked about this with my team extensively, which is that if you, on a go-forward basis, pretty safe bet, directionally correct, not precisely wrong, is that there will be more agents, digital employees in the workplace, relative to the growth of to human employees. And so what that means from an architectural perspective is people care about UIs, user interface, right? How we interact with the software, keyboard, and what it looks like, what the screen looks like. Agents don't care about that. Agents care about clean APIs. So I think there's going to be a shift in terms of the investment and the time allocated to ensuring strong APIs for agents to be able to interact with software relative to humans being able to interact with software via UIs. And so this is why you're seeing and hearing things like Model Context Protocol, MCP servers being stood up and really managed now. And that's something that wasn't really taken. We know API management was sort of like the second-class citizen within the CIO shop. I don't think that's going to be the case moving forward.
Got it. So great. So I think we're kind of out of time here. For those of you who asked the question, so we couldn't get to all the questions, but hopefully we can share some of these questions to the speakers, and if they're able, they'll be able to answer them for you guys. So thank you, June, Chris, Frederick, for your time. Very good discussion here today, and I'm sure there's a lot more we can discuss, and hopefully some of the attendees can talk to you separately after the event. And for those of you who joined us, we'll have the recording for you. We'll be sharing them with you probably in the next few days. And I look forward to seeing all of you in our next event. Thank you all. Have a good day.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.